All right, welcome. And today we are going to discuss the topic of slip and fall in NYC, wet floors, icy sidewalks, and building defects that cause serious injuries. Welcome to another informative segment of Live with Mitch from the law firm of Proner and Proner. I'm your host, Mel Magoya, and we sit down with the expert himself, Mr. Mitch Proner, a personal injury attorney with over 30 years of experience, here to answer your questions or any interesting topics that you might find useful in your personal injury world. And just remember, folks, if you need to contact us, all consultations are free and confidential. Call us at any time at 1-800 321 1234. How are you doing, Mitch?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Not too bad. I'm actually kind of glad it's a little cold. It's kind of limiting my writing time, but that's okay. I know you're still writing, right?
It's getting cold. I'm I live in the city, so I tend to walk most places.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, let's get right to it. Yeah, today we're discussing or actually, you're going to discuss the slip and fall in NYC. So, Mitch, when someone suffers a serious injury like a fracture or head injury after slipping on a wet floor, icy sidewalk, or a building defect, who can actually be held responsible in New York City?
All right, so you covered too much there in one question, but I'll break it
Ah,
down. I'll
okay.
break
Let's
it
break
down.
it down then.
Okay. So, first of all, not every time you fall is there a proper defendant. A
Okay.
proper defendant is somebody who could be responsible for the injuries you've sustained. So, for example, let's suppose I'm walking along and I'm not paying attention to where I'm walking because I'm looking at my cell phone
Okay.
and I happen to walk into a tree. That's not really a case. It's just my own carelessness. I can't sue the city of New York because they put a tree on the sidewalk because fact of the matter is the city does put trees on sidewalks and they're not liable just because I don't see it because I was looking at my cell phone. A tree is not a defect. In order to have an injury where you're entitled to compensation for pain and suffering, medical bills, loss of earnings for that injury, somebody has to be at fault other than yourself. And people nowadays, they're oftentimes walking around looking at their cell phones. If that's the circumstances, if you fall because you're not paying attention, you're probably not going to have much of a case. When is somebody responsible? If there's a defect. In addition, for some types of defects, you need to prove notice.
Okay.
Okay, so you threw in a lot of different scenarios. One is sidewalks, one
Hmm.
is stores, and various different locations. Somebody could be going and have a trip and fall or a slip and fall. So let's start off with if it happens on a sidewalk. If it happens on a sidewalk in the city of New York, typically the adjacent landowner is responsible to make sure that the sidewalk is free from defects. Now, if the sidewalk is uneven because it gets old and the flagstones, those are the squares of the sidewalk, happen to get uneven, so it creates a tripping hazard. That's a defect the adjoining landowner can be responsible for.
Okay.
Let's suppose it's a grate that's there for a Con Ed chamber that's below the sidewalk. And from using the grate repeatedly, it gets bent and it becomes a tripping hazard. That can be something Con Ed could be held responsible for.
Okay.
Let's suppose there's a store and they have a basement and they repeatedly open and close a metal swinging door to the basement and that gets bent and creates a tripping hazard. Well, the store and the landlord could be held responsible for that. Let's suppose it's a snowy day or a rainy day
Okay.
and the sidewalk's slippery and somebody slips and falls. If it's active snowfall, meaning the snow is actually coming down, probably not a defect the landowner is responsible for. But if it stops snowing 3 days prior and the landlord piled it up, and then from repeated thawing and snowing, or thawing and melting and freezing, it gets icy. And it's more dangerous than it was when it snowed because the conditions the landlord created. That could be something that the landowner is responsible for.
Okay.
So you gotta, when it's a snow and ice condition, you gotta look at the weather records to see if there's a case.
Okay.
And it might not be a case just because it's a slippery sidewalk if it's active snowfall. That's typically what the law is. Now, let's suppose you're crossing the street in the middle of a block and there's a pothole there and you trip over that. That's typically not a case. Because typically to hold the municipality responsible, you need to show notice.
Okay.
And that notice, if it's not a cause and create, that they didn't create that notice, it's typically 90 days. I'm sorry, it's prior written notice and a 90-day notice of claim requirement. So there's specific laws that can determine whether or not there's a case. Then if you're in a store and you slip because of slippery conditions, well, if it's snowing outside and you slip because there's snow on the bottom of your boots because you didn't wipe it off on the way inside,
Right.
well, the store owner is not required to have somebody there checking your boots. That might not be a case.
Right.
On the other hand, if in the store there's refrigeration that's leaking, that could be something the landowner is responsible for.
Uh-huh.
So what the cause of the slippery condition can determine whether or not you have a case.
Okay.
And once you determine the cause of the case and the notice of the condition, then you can look at the injuries to determine the amount of compensation that you're entitled to.
Mitch, can I ask you a question? Because for layman's like myself, in terms of some of these terms, can you define notice for us, please?
Okay, let's suppose I'm walking through my lobby in my building, and I'm walking behind somebody who's renting an apartment from one of the owners in my building. My building's a condo, right? There's co-ops, there's condos, there's rental buildings, all sorts of buildings.
Right.
Somebody's just a tenant in the building. And they happen to be drinking whatever, a Starbucks Frappuccino. Okay? And it's not mixed up enough because it's slushy. So they take the lid off and they try to mix it up with the straw and they spill it on the floor. And I'm walking right behind them and I slip and I crack my head.
Mhm.
Well, what's the building supposed to do? Nobody expects the building to have workers walk behind everybody that walks in the building. Also, nobody expects the building to say, "Excuse me, You can't walk in the building with a frappuccino.
Right.
Nobody's policing what people have in their hands. If you look around the sidewalks of New York, everybody's walking around holding something to drink.
Yeah.
That's our culture. And when you walk into a building with your water bottle, nobody says, "Hey, no water bottles in this building." They don't do that, right?
Right.
So you walk in with a water bottle and you spill it, and somebody right behind you slips and falls. The building's not responsible because they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't know that there was a dangerous condition and ignored. Now, suppose they did see it spill, and now they know there's a wet spot there. And they say, somebody ought to clean that up.
Mm.
And then they just leave it. And somebody writes in a pad, clean up that water spot.
Okay.
And nobody cleans it up. And they don't put signs around it.
Mm.
And 4 hours later, somebody slips there. Well, that's different than not policing somebody from walking in and telling them you can't walk in holding a drink.
Right.
That's there. They knew there was a dangerous condition. They had notice of a dangerous condition.
There you go. Okay.
And they didn't fix it.
Okay.
So typically notice is like a slip and fall in a supermarket where somebody spills something and they say, clean it up. And they
Right.
don't. Right?
Right. Definitely.
Or notice can be actual notice, like somebody says, hey, you should clean that up. That's slippery. That's dangerous. Or it could be constructive notice, which means it existed so long that they should have known. So, for example, let's suppose they got these mats. Whenever it rains, they put out mats. Well, what happens if they put out mats and the mats are getting old and the corners are curling?
Hmm.
Well, then they should know. It didn't get old overnight. Old has been like that for a while.
Yeah.
And they should have realized these mats are old. Somebody's going to trip on them. We should replace it.
Okay.
Or if they put it down with a wave in it, they didn't make sure it was flat. Well, they created that hazard.
Hmm.
They made it more dangerous by not making sure the mat was flat. And that they could be held liable for.
Okay.
Because if you create a condition, you're deemed to have notice of it. Right?
Right.
So if I'm working in a building as a carpenter and I leave my toolbox laying around the dark corner, well, I can't say, oh, I didn't realize I left my tool bag there because I forgot about it.
Hmm.
No, you created that condition. You had notice of it.
Okay.
That's notice.
Okay. That's now clear for me. Thank you.
So typically for a premises liability case, which means when you trip and fall, slip and fall at a premises, which is a place, you need to have notice unless you
Okay.
cause and create it. Now, let's suppose somebody slips and falls because it's leaking. Well, somebody can't say, I didn't know it was leaking, because you're supposed to maintain your plumbing so it doesn't leak. And if you don't maintain it, that could be deemed constructive notice.
Okay.
So that's it. Whether or not you're entitled to compensation depends on the particulars of the case. The most important thing is you don't need to, if you're involved in a trip and fall, you need to know what happened. You need to know where it happened. But then you could run it by an experienced attorney and say, is this a case?
There you go. Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you again, Mitch. I really appreciate you expanding on that. I'm sure some of our viewers do appreciate that too. Well, that'll do it for now. And thank you again for all of you for tuning in, whether it's on our podcast or video broadcast. We really do appreciate you taking the time. And as always, remember you can call us 24/7 at 1-800-321-1234, where consultations are free and confidential. Also, if you haven't done it yet, please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course, YouTube. Like, share, and please subscribe so you get the latest updates. Now, before we go, Mitch, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, if there is a defect, take a photo of it. Everybody walks around with their cell phones, and most cell phones have photos. Take a photo of it. And don't just get a photo of like a little puddle of water. Get the background, get it from different angles so you can see where that puddle of water is. Take 40 photos if you can. Um, Naturally, you want to get help immediately. You want to call an ambulance if you suspect you're injured or bleeding or something. But try and take a photo of the defect that caused it. That can make a difference between whether or not you get a lot of money or you don't get paid at all.
There you go.
Most
Great. No,
importantly, be careful. Look where you're walking. Don't text and walk into a tree.
yeah, it's true. There you go. No, yet more great advice from Mitch. Well, thank you again, Mitch, for taking this time for another informative session with you. And thank you all for checking us out. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Mitch.
Thanks, Mel. Be well.
You too.